as a professional, as a professor, part of an institution, many of us here are faculty, how does one deal with that? Maybe you can talk just a little bit about that if you can.
So I would say the most appropriate way to deal with that would be truthfully, would be, to actually, not hide something, not tell lies, not, try to keep something from people from knowing things, but to actually just say, well, we have this issue and we are going to deal with it the best way we know how. We're going to bring in people who know how to do repatriation, who understand all of the laws and the appropriate way to proceed, how to honor the ancestors, to make amends to the ancestors, how to do cleansing, all of those things. Ask for help, and then follow the protocol, right? It's like pushing it under a rug, hiding it, keeping it from people is not the way to handle it. And this is happening all over the country. There are a lot of places that have done this quite well. So there are examples of people who have done a beautiful job of dealing with this very tragic situation. So that's what I would say. Just having a little bit of honesty and respect. Because respect will take you through anything, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Some of the poems you have are visual poems. What would you say was like the motivation behind creating some of these, and which one is your favorite? I really like that one.
So, I think about sometimes the way that image is helping to carry the meaning. And as I said, I was inspired by Anishinaabe pictographs and also ledger art. And ledger art, if you don't know, are these layers of text and image where things are spilling into one another. And I feel like there's a complex conversation, and also that there's kind of a gesture, right, that happens. And so the one that you had up there with the hanged woman, I was asked to create work for No More Stolen Sisters. So on missing and murdered, on missing and murdered Indigenous women. It were 3 pieces, and one of them is this one. And then one is what I call a transcript, which really isn't a transcript of this at all, but it's another expression of it. Because I feel like looking at things from many angles is sometimes a helpful process, right? And then the other one, which you had, which is the image that follows, they all are called like see as sacred, not extracted. So they're all dealing with something similar, and that is the way of not possessing, not thinking of Indigenous issues as game, or, so I felt like one of the things that visual poem does is it throws it out to the reader so that the reader has a role in deciphering the meaning, right? Because I feel like that's actually what a lot of Indigenous storytelling and songs and dance and everything is. It's asking for participation. It's not the delivery of meaning, because that's really hard to come to, right? So it becomes a kind of then collaboration of the reader, listener working with the piece on the page or the voice to create meaning, together to create meaning. So that's part of why I do that.
Thank you.
Poetry is something that I've struggled with reading a lot, and reading in your work today and the past week, I've found that the way you write is just, it flows so naturally that when I do poetry, I struggle with that. Do you have any tips for students who are poets?
So one of the things that I do, not saying that my method will work for you, but I read everything out loud, right? Because poetry obviously is sonic. It's about the sound. It's about the song. And so I feel like that is part of how you're going to be able to lift it off the page. And so I was once videotaped they were just wanted to videotape you writing. And I was embarrassed to see how many times I would read out loud to myself and like, no, don't do that. And then I would, like correct myself. So I have these weird conversations. What I do is I really literally am trying to look at it new every time. And my best advice is to put it away. And I can't always do that. But some of the poems that didn't have that benefit of being put in a drawer for a while or not looked at for at least a few days, I'm a little embarrassed by in the world, because usually it always gets better. And I do a couple of other things is I want to pay attention to juxtaposition and what is rubbing against something else. Because, like just the way you make fire by rubbing sticks, you can rub things together that gets a spark. And sometimes it's unexpected. Like many times I will just disorder. It's a way of reordering, but I'll take it out of its quote unquote grammatical or normal or correct order, because then it's a surprise of language and it helps us like to be thrown out of the normal rote understanding. And so I have a lot of different things that I do for myself for revision, but we were having this conversation earlier today about revision, and I forgot what John said, but I have a friend who says that revision is the party. That's where all the fun happens, right? So I think that is one of the things I would pass on, but also just that it's oral. If poetry is oral, it should be a song. It should be able to, be performed. And someone told me once that I'll tap my foot. I don't even know that I'm tapping my foot when I'm reading, but apparently I do that sometimes. Yeah.
Could you talk about your photography? And are you just out like taking pretty pictures and then how does your photography interact with your poetry in your creative process?
I appreciate that question. And I don't take photos, I make photos. So that is it's very deliberate, right? And so there's oftentimes, there's so many things to say about this. I'm going to say a few things that are not going to be very perfectly put together. But one thing is I'm doing the same thing in the photography as I am doing in the poetry. I think it's an act of attention. It's a way of looking closely. And as you'll notice in some of these, this one is a perfect example. We're not looking at the classic postcard image of a loon. There's one where I have only the claws of the woodpecker. I'm trying to show the intricate reality of some of the beings, right? And other things I do is I want to suggest motion, like those drips of water are about to fall. You know what I'm saying? Is I want it to be alive. I don't want it to be static. So sometimes something will spill off the edge of the photo. I am oftentimes understanding the photo as similar to some of the poetry, which is kind of like a haiku moment, or the way we love something small. It's that kind of transformational moment. So when I take a lot of time to think about what does this mean, say, sing, I'm often in a kayak when I'm making photos. I'm often feeling like I have disappeared, right? It's like, you do lose yourself in these kinds of experiences. And sometimes something will just really strike you as stunning, amazing. And you know that either that's too stunning and amazing, I forgot I even had a camera, or I have to, try to make an image of this in a way that could carry that feeling, not the static reality, but the feeling of the alive reality of that being to someone. So there were a group of photos in here. There's one where I had gone out one morning during the pandemic. I got to teach from my cabin adjacent to the Boundary Waters Canary Wilderness. It was amazing. So this was October, and it had already begun to freeze a little. The water's beginning to freeze. But I put on everything I could think of, a lot of clothes, and I went out, and I had X amount of time before I had to get back and log into Zoom and teach my class. So I went out, and I was freezing. So I ducked into a little cove and was drinking coffee because I take my camera, my journal, a book, coffee, and something that I can shelter in case I get stranded, right? Those are the things I take with me. So I ducked into a little cove and I was drinking my coffee, just trying to warm up, and I heard something. And it was like right there. Did you see the image of the blackback woodpecker? So amazing. I'd never seen a blackback woodpecker that close. So it allowed me to just turn and make a photo. And then I was just really happy about this, but I was also really cold. And I was like, okay, I just can't do it today. I got to go back. I got to get warmed up before I teach. So I started back, and then an eagle flew over. So there's the one image of the eagle in the sky. And I kept it because that's exactly the way it came, right? And so I popped up my camera and made that image. And then looked back in front of me. And when you're kayaking or canoeing, you always have to pay attention to the water, right? Where's this? Where are the rocks? Where are the trees? So I looked down, I'm like, wow, I didn't see that log there. And then all of a sudden, you're going to guess what happened. The log started swimming. And it was the muckwa. Was it right there? There it is. Yeah, it was muckwa. And it was like stunning, right? So I am just watching muckwa swim across. And then I suddenly realized, oh, camera. So then I pick up my camera, and the very first second, click, he turned his head. And I just said, "Bonjour, Makwa. You're good, I'm good. I'm nothing, I'm on top of nothing." He's like, okay, he shrugs, swims on, gets out of the water, shakes himself off, and goes into the fall woods. And it was just like so beautiful, right? So I encounter and relish these moments, and I try to bring to others that feeling, the experience itself, through the photos the best I can, and sometimes I succeed and sometimes I don't. But that's sort of my idea, is that it's that sort of way of experiencing the experience. That was a long answer, sorry.
So I have a question, Kim.
Yeah.
So one thing about your work that has always really spoken to me, I think you call out a lot of histories and traumas, and both personal, cultural, national. But then I think, and you showed it with the last few poems that you read, there's also what I think of when I think of your writing is there's a power in healing. And so I can feel that, and you kind of speak to it in a really powerful way. And so I guess in this moment in time, I mean, do you think that humans are going to be okay?
I feel like we have the ability to be okay. And so what this book is asking us to look at ancient light, to look at old teachings, to turn back to true ways, and to abandon some of our kind of devourment of the world, right? That idea of ownership and possession and collection and all of that, because that time for that is over. We are in a really precarious time, and we have to really change the way, and I feel like the way that Indigenous people provide us with those 3 R's, which is respect. What are they? Respect, relatedness, and reciprocity. Those are the tools we need to know, right? And we need to live them. So what I think is that ancient light provides a different way of being in the world, right? And what we need right now is to accept that we need to live differently, we need to be differently, we need to understand who we are in relationship to everything else, not as some supreme being, not as some owner and someone who can manage and sell and buy. Capitalism should go out the door right now. That's what I say. A new way of being.
Welcome. Thank you for the gifts you're giving us today. There may be some people who don't know the history of the jingle dance, and I'm hoping you might share that wonderful story, that wonderful history.
Absolutely. So The title of that poem that I read was Ikoenimi, which is really the woman's dance. And it's interesting that the jingle dress is just over 100 years old. And it came about in the last pandemic, during the flu epidemic. And some people say it was in one area. Some people say, well, I like to believe it was in Minnesota, of course. And many people really do position it there. And so there was a young woman who became very ill, a young girl that became very ill. And her father prayed and, made some offerings. And then he fell asleep and he had a dream and he had a vision. And in his vision, he saw these women four women were dressed in a certain kind of dress, and they were dancing in a particular way. And ask me about Sandy Whitehawk later. I want to not forget that. But anyway, so then he took this to the lodge, and he said, I had this dream. And, sometimes we just dismiss our dreams, but oftentimes there's wisdom and there's power in the dreams. And they said, we have to enact that, right? So people made the dresses, they all gathered and they had songs, the women were dancing, and the girl was in the center of the lodge. And then as the women were dancing, suddenly she started to get stronger. And she was able to actually stand and join them and dance with them. And then she was healed, right? So it's called, and there are, it's called a medicine dress because it is a medicine. And it continues to be used as a healing dress, a healing dance. And it's not only for the healing of the body, but it's also for the healing of the spirit. And the healing of, as I said, part of our illness in this country is racism. And so many times you'll see people come out, and it's used in resistance. Like that's why I talk about resistance in that one poem, is because it's trying to resist the evil also and to heal us of some of those influences. So it continues to be a very important, vibrant dress that you'll see in all kinds of ceremonies. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, one more thing. So in that poem, you heard me say 365. So there are 365 jingles on the dress. So it is quite heavy. And that is to represent the 365 days of the year. There are some other protocols about how the dance is done and so forth. But it's a pretty special tradition. And a lot of times you will practice with people. You will be apprenticed to a dancer before you actually go into the circle.
Another class that I'm in, we read a lot of stuff about cultural trauma and memory. And I was wondering if you can talk a bit about like the importance or the significance of memory and just remembering in your work, even if there's like a poem that comes to mind that you wrote connected to that idea or theme.
Sure, absolutely. So I like to think of that term in the way that Paula Gunn Allen used it, as remembering or putting back together, right? To put back together. And I feel like memory is also a gift. So oftentimes the stories are filled with tribal memories, and we are also asked to remember and carry with us songs and stories and teachings, and not everything is written down, right? So it is an art and it's a responsibility to remember and to carry with you all of the history, stories, teachings, etc. of your ancestors. And so for me, I actually felt like my earliest collection, which was Trailing You, was filled with memory poems. And I began writing originally because I felt like the stories and experiences of many of my relatives and my ancestors at White Earth were not honored. were not written, were not allowed to be, I mean, because there was actually a point in time when the dances were forbidden, the stories, the gatherings, all that was forbidden. And I felt like there was because people were so busy just trying to survive, many of those things had not been properly honored. So that in my earliest impetus was to carry those stories through poems and to carry the memories and so forth. But I feel, that there's a power that memory has. And I also think that remembering is something we commit to, right? And that it's partly like, for example, if you sit around a drum, those people aren't looking at a book to sing their songs, right? There's something about if you memorize or remember something, it inhabits you in a way that it doesn't if it's elsewhere. You've actually swallowed it. It's become a part of you. So it inhabits you and you inhabit it. And then you can actually give it away in a better fashion, I think.
I'm fascinated with the idea of the importance of small rituals throughout our day, making coffee, dinner at the table. But oftentimes people tend to prioritize the importance and the meaning of things we perceive as being in the distant past. And so I just wanted to know any of your thoughts on creating new customs and new rituals.
I do not know if I can do this for you, but I have a poem. I don't think it's in any of those books either. Just give me a half of a second. I'll talk while I try to get it into my brain. But I actually also think that we have rituals that we enact every day, and that they're also, they're fruitful and they can feed us. So there's a poem, I think it's called Rituals, Yours and Mine. Forgive me if I don't get all the way through it. 1, living by your words as if I haven't enough of my own to stretch that long distance from home to here, from then to now, and all the new words I've ever read, learned, or shelved so neatly can't explain myself to me, like yours always do. Sometimes that one gesture of your chin and lips, the sideways movement of your eyes are the only words from that language I can use to put things in their place. Walked in on you today, closed the screen door quietly so you wouldn't notice just yet. Stood, watched you mumbling, shuffling about the kitchen, your long yellow-gray braid hanging heavy down your back. Wanted to see you turn just that way. Hear that familiar exclamation, you snapping the dish towel, landing it just short of me. Shame on me for surprising you. Don't change anything, I chant quietly. Wiping your hands on your faded print apron, you lay them gently, still, damp, cool, one on each side of my face for that long, long second. When do you come? Sit down, I'm making breakfast. I watch the wrinkled, loose flesh jiggle on your arms as you reach to wind and pin your braid. Hurry to find your teeth behind the water pail. Pull up your peanut butter stockings, pull down your flowered house dress, and wet your fingers to smooth the hair back behind your ears. Smoothing away time, with the fluid line of your memory, I am in place at your table. In the morning damp of the still dark kitchen, I wait for you to come. Stepping through the curtained doorway, intent on this day. Restart the fire, place the kettle, pull open the kitchen door, inviting daylight to come, welcoming it into your house, bringing it into mine.
Good.